So Apple's Studio Display is finally here. I have one in the studio. I've avoided every review so far, but I've heard on the grapevine that it hasn't been very well received. So what's going on? Hello and welcome back to Ellis Reviews, and thank you for subscribing if you have, and if you haven't subscribed, the button is just down there. This is the brand new Apple Studio Display. It was launched earlier this month alongside the Mac Studio, but that isn't the reason I wanted one. I'm not going to get the Mac Studio at the moment. For me, this Studio Display is a brilliant, or should be, a brilliant partner for my 16-inch MacBook Pro. So, does it fit the bill in that regard? Is it worth all of that money? And are there any better alternatives? Right, pricing and specs, I'll grab my trusty iPad because I've got all the numbers in front of me here. So the Studio Display starts at £1,499 in the UK and $1,500 in the US. That gets you a 27-inch 5K Retina display with a 5120 by 2880 resolution. It's got 218 pixels per inch, 600 nits of brightness, 1 billion colors, P3 wide color, true tone, and it comes with a tilt adjustable stand, which you can change, which I'll come on to in a moment, and a Thunderbolt cable, which was a surprise. Now, Apple being Apple, you can add some fairly silly things to this. So for example, for £250 more, you can add nano texture glass to reduce glare. And if you've got 400 quid spare, you can swap the standard tilt stand for a tilt and height adjustable stand. There's also a Visa mount adapter. That doesn't cost any more. You can just swap the standard stand for the Visa mount. And actually, if you spec this monitor up by having the nano texture glass thing and the tilty, swivelly stand, and adding AppleCare Plus, it takes the total up to £2,268. Design-wise, the Studio Display looks a bit like a cross between a new iMac, I think it shares the same base and hinge design, and the older Apple Cinema display. And the Studio Display does look like a modern version of that Cinema display, without the Apple logo at the bottom, obviously thinner bezels, thinner overall, but it's definitely got that kind of retro chic thing going on, which the MacBook Pros, the new MacBook Pros, have kind of ushered in. It's built from aluminium, as you would expect from Apple. It's pleasingly heavy, and it's that classic Apple thing where you put this on pretty much any desk and it will look lovely. And yeah, those bezels are a bit big by modern standards, but Apple has never really cared about that, I don't think, to be honest. And it does just have that kind of Apple aesthetic. It does look very nice on my desk. The hinge also feels great. There's plenty of tiltability for what I'd need. And the two cables that you get with it are also of very high quality. They're braided, feel very tough. You get a Thunderbolt cable, like I mentioned, which was a surprise, actually. I just, for whatever reason, I thought Apple wouldn't bother with that. It is only 1 meter long, which is a bit annoying, but at least it's there and it is very high quality. And a power cable, which has thrown quite a few people because it comes pre-attached to the monitor. And I assumed straight away that it was fixed. Apparently it's not. If you give it enough force and yank it out, it does detach. I'm not going to do that though. So overall, a very pretty monitor from Apple. The bezels are questionable, I completely agree, but no, it's all right. It looks great, it's nice, but does that make it worth so much money? Now let's get straight to the chase with the panel on this Studio Display. I think it is pretty much the same panel that you get in the 5K iMac. I did notice one difference on the spec sheet, which is that the Studio Display has 100 nits more brightness than the 5K iMac, but everything else is identical. And those 100 nits do make a difference. It's a noticeably brighter panel than my 5K iMac, but everything else is the same. It's the same sharpness, the colors are still lovely and vivid. That glossy screen does make the contrast lovely, and it looks like an iMac screen. It's also a 60Hz display, so it doesn't have a high refresh rate. Now, that does grate a little bit. And I've got the 16-inch MacBook Pro, which has the variable refresh rate ProMotion 120Hz thing. And although, as I've said in the past, you don't notice that all the time, now that I've put it side by side against the Studio Display, I think the fact that Apple hasn't bothered to put ProMotion onto this £1,500 Studio Display is a little bit mean. Not all apps support ProMotion on the MacBook Pros, but the ones that do are noticeable. And I notice it most commonly when I'm scrolling through the timeline on Final Cut Pro, for instance. And even moving the mouse around the screen on the MacBook Pro versus the Studio Display, there's definitely a difference. It's a bit more jaggedy on the Studio Display. And this is made worse by the fact that you can get both iPads and iPhones now with high refresh rate screens. But I think the reason we're not seeing ProMotion on this Studio Display is because there's going to be another Studio Display of some description, which is more expensive, has higher specs, has larger screen. Apple are going to put ProMotion in that, but it doesn't change the fact that for £1,500, I'd expect more than a 60Hz panel. In terms of connectivity, there are 4 ports on the back. There's one Thunderbolt port, which you use to connect your MacBook or your Mac Studio or whatever you're going to plug into this thing, and also 3 USB-C ports. And if you're a MacBook user like me, it is a really neat setup because all you do, you put your MacBook on the desk, you plug in one cable, and it powers the MacBook and feeds the screen. So easy. And those 3 USB-C ports are quite handy actually. I connected one of my SanDisk external SSDs to it, which I use to edit these videos, and it worked perfectly fast, no problem with that whatsoever. So it kind of turns the Studio Display into a hub for your Mac as well. The Studio Display has an A13 chip in it, and I heard this morning that it is apparently running a kind of pared down, highly customized version of iOS 15, which is quite interesting. But all that A13 chip is really doing is powering the webcam, it's enabling things like spatial audio, and it also enables Hey functionality. Let's start with the webcam. Again, I've not watched any of the reviews so far, but I do know, and I've heard in the grapevine, because you can't stay clear of it, that it's not been very well received whatsoever, and it's pretty terrible. I'll show you some test footage now, and it's just, the term potato cam is used quite a lot when it comes to Apple's webcams, and this is the same, I'm afraid. I even compared it against the 16-inch MacBook Pro, and that looks pretty terrible as well. The MacBook Pro has this weird kind of smoothing going on my face, as you can see, but they're both terrible, let's be honest. I know that Apple has spent, well, they tell us they've spent lots more time on their webcams, and they've put 1080p cameras in there. They're using, in this case, the A13 chip to do some image stuff to it as well, I assume. But it's not doing much, it's noisy, it's not particularly very detailed, it doesn't look very high resolution. I even tried lighting my face with a key light, and that made pretty much no difference whatsoever either. It's just not a very good webcam. It does have center stage support, which is quite nice, and that is when, if someone else comes into the frame, the camera recognizes that and kind of pans out and fits you both in. That's quite useful. And it is nice that it's integrated. You don't get a webcam at all in the Pro Display XDR. It's just not very good. And I think for a lot of people who take pride in their webcam performance, which is an important thing these days, are probably going to end up ditching the built-in camera on the Studio Display and going with their own third-party one, which kind of negates the point of it being there at all. The other problem I had with the camera, and this might be down to my height or something, is that I had to angle the monitor forward a bit too much just to get the framing right, because if I left it at the normal viewing angle, there was all this space above my head. I found that a bit odd. The speakers in the Studio Display are actually pretty good. They're not going to replace your hi-fi or anything like that, but bearing in mind that most monitor speakers are terrible, they're a serious step above. But that shouldn't come as a surprise. Apple does some very good things with audio these days, given the constraints they have with these devices. The bass is a bit boxy, but it goes loud enough, and there's a lot of detail there. It's an impressive sound, bearing in mind this is a monitor. It also has spatial audio support, which in this form is a little bit gimmicky. You can just about hear it. If you listen to a piece of music that is recorded in spatial audio, you can't hear things behind you, but there is this kind of very wide soundstage that you get. And it's okay. It's not like listening to spatial audio stuff with your AirPods at all. It's a bit of a gimmick, to be honest. So, is the Studio Display worth buying? This is a tough one. It's a beautiful looking thing, it's very well made. The screen, if you've ever seen a 5K iMac screen, it's that good. But equally, that's part of the problem. It's fairly old tech, and Apple is asking for an awful lot of money for this monitor. I think what you're getting for that is a admittedly very nice screen, fantastic build quality, and very nice aesthetics. But that won't be enough for most people, I don't think, given the price. And if I wasn't running this channel, I wouldn't buy a Studio Display. And the reason for that is simple. It's too expensive, and there are some better alternatives. There are, in fact, loads of alternatives to the Studio Display, but that's part of the issue, because where do you start? So today I'm going to give you two options which I think are definitely worth looking at if you just can't bring yourself to spend £1,500 on Apple's Studio Display. The first one is a pick from my podcast co-host Rob, and it's a Huawei MateView. Now this is a 28.3 inch display. It's just over 4K resolution, 10-bit P3 color, 1 billion colors, 500 nits of brightness. It's even got an aluminium frame, and it's got a height adjustable stand for no extra cost. It starts at £499, but at the moment in the UK you can get £100 off thanks to a cashback offer. So it's considerably cheaper compared to the Studio Display. Now in the latest episode of the 8 or 16 podcast, which I'll link to in the description, Rob goes into detail about his thoughts on that monitor, and let's just say he's pretty impressed. The other option you have is Dell. Now Dell have their Ultra Fine series, which are very highly regarded. They're a bit plasticky, but they are good monitors and they are considerably cheaper than the Studio Display. So for instance, you can get a 27-inch ultra sharp Dell monitor for about £700, £800, and the specs are very similar to the Studio Display. It also has very good warranty from Dell. They have a 0 dead pixel policy. It's got HDR 400 support, and it's even got the full kind of tilt, swivel, height adjustable stand as standard. So those are just two examples of monitors that are considerably cheaper than the Studio Display. But as always, I'm fascinated by what you guys are going to do. Are you or are you not going to buy a Studio Display? Let me know the reasons in the comments. If you've still got some time, keep watching for a link to a video where I give my full reaction to Apple's March event. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.